Welcome, everyone, to the Hammer Territory podcast, and we are thrilled to say that we have three individuals here, and that is the sign when it comes to Hammer Territory that a very good thing has happened. I believe that the ratio of singular or emergency podcasts so far this offseason is 5-0, talking about people that have left the Braves, but we finally get to do one on somebody coming to Atlanta. Here with Stephen Tolbert and Scott Coleman. And Scott, we'll get started with you. There is a reason we're all gathered here to talk about an off-season move. Let's get the immediate details and reaction from one Scott Coleman on the newest Atlanta Brave.
That's right. And the long national nightmare is finally over, boys. We have done it about, 3 months into the offseason. We finally have a transaction. If for somehow this is the very first time you are hearing about it, and I would be shocked, Jurickson Profar has signed with the Atlanta Braves. 3-year deal, $42 million. And I got to say, guys, I don't want to speak for you both, and we have plenty to talk about on the show tonight, but I'm really excited for this deal. And I think it's a home run addition for the Braves.
Yeah, the Braves needed outfield help. We've said it a million times this offseason. The Braves needed outfield help. They had Michael Harris, Acuna coming back from injury, Jared Kelenic. We didn't know what he was going to do. Didn't have a great year last year. All they had done is Brian De La Cruz. They needed an outfielder. And, I've been screaming for the mountaintops for like 3 years now that I wanted more left-handed / switch hitters in the lineup, more balance in the lineup, not so right-handed. This serves that purpose. The contract, which we'll get to in detail, is a very strong number for the team. I don't know if it's a home run 10 out of 10 move, but I think it's at least like an 8 out of 10. Like when you match need, when you match contract, when you match fit with player. I have nothing but good things to say about this move, and we'll get into the details. But yeah, 30,000 feet. I think it's a fantastic move.
I think it's a great addition as well. In one player, I'm not saying that he all of a sudden is the type of player that, propels us to being clearly among the two best teams with World Series odds, like many had hoped we would make a move for. But he's someone who checks a lot of boxes in the maybe we don't consider these things important enough categories that we talked about last year, especially with him as a hitter. But let's get the general details out of the way first. A 3-year, $42 million deal for Jurickson Profar, $12 million in 2025, with $15 million being there to be paid to him in 2026 and 2027. We will let our resident payroll expert, Stephen Tolbert, talk about that a little bit later on in the show. But I think, Scott, many know the name Jurickson Profar. But what about him stands out just when you start looking at him throughout his career? Just some details about, why he makes sense for the Braves and why now he seems to be a really good fit in multiple ways.
So Jurickson Profar has had a fascinating career. He's going to turn 32 next month. And once upon a time, for folks maybe our age, a little bit older, Profar was like the prospect in baseball. He was the number one overall prospect maybe a decade ago, and really was a lot of folks pegged him to be a superstar. And to this point, or at least up until last year, it just hadn't worked out. And Profar had a couple of fine seasons. He's kind of the utility type who played all over the infield and outfield. But it was never that moment of like, wow, this guy is the player who we all thought he was going to be many years ago. Flash forward, he is so bad in 2023 that Profar gets released by the Colorado Rockies. You know how hard it is to get released by the Rockies? That's about as low as it gets for a major leaguer. He signs a $1 million deal with the Padres last offseason. And what does Profar do but go on to be like a legitimate all-star, a silver slugger, one of the best hitters in the game? So we should probably say just right off the jump that, to be clear, the Braves are buying a player who is coming at like the very peak of his value. Like there's no buying low on Jurickson Profar because of how good he was last season. But as we're going to talk about tonight, there was enough behind him being so good and having a breakout at age 31 that, at least in my opinion, it feels more real than maybe some other players who have broken out. And I mean, there's a lot of encouraging things in his batted ball data and just the way he kind of overhauled his entire offensive approach over the last year with San Diego. That makes me think this could be a real sign of things to come.
So he went to San Diego, and a big part of this is he immediately changed his swing. He immediately went to work with Fernando Tatis's father, who was a hitting coach, and he changed his swing, and he altered a lot of what he does at the plate. He increased his exit velocity by 5 miles an hour from 2023 to 2024, which is basically unheard of. We talked about this earlier in the offseason, and I did mention this because that's actually remarkable. You never see somebody like 5 miles an hour in exit velocity is, I mean, it's very equivalent to 5 miles an hour in like fastball velocity for a pitcher. Like it's a big, big, big jump, and it completely changes his profile. It completely changes his outlook. He hits the ball on average about as hard as like an Austin Riley does now. And that's, this is a guy who was like Scott just said, got released by the Rockies because he couldn't hit. And he changed his swing, changed his mechanics. His batted ball profile is just so much better now. And listen, this is what Alex looks for. We know this. He cares about batted ball profiles. When Marcell Ozuna was coming off those 2 very iffy years with the Cardinals, he signed Ozuna to a 1-year deal because the batted ball numbers were just excellent. And, obviously Ozuna went on to have an MVP caliber year that first year with the Braves. So this is stuff Alex cares about. And it's why it's not just a 1-year wonder. There's actual data behind the results. If it was just the results, I'd be pretty nervous about this. But because there's real data, because there's real raw data behind what he did last year and there's real change, it's just so much easier to believe it. It's so much easier to bet on it. The Braves were not the only team willing to give Profar this contract. I guarantee you that. He had other suitors. This was right around his projection. It's not like the Braves just blew it out of the water. Came in a little under projection, but it's right in range, right in line. So yeah, the actual real data behind it is what gives me confidence in this move. If that wasn't there, I would have a very different tone about, giving this guy $42 million, but I think it's real. And, the proof will be in the pudding, but playing in Atlanta, getting to, bat left-handed and, with a chop house, I think is going to help. Getting out of San Diego. San Diego is not a good hitter's park, by the way. He produced those results in a really tough place to hit. So I like it. I like the move. I think it's good for the offense. They needed another outfielder. We'll talk about the defense here in a second, but the batted ball, the batted ball stuff is real enough where I can get on board with this.
And the other thing that stands out to me that is such a great asset for Profar to come to this lineup is, what did we talk about last year so many times? It was the lack of situational hitting, runners in scoring position. If we weren't hitting home runs, this offense a lot of last season was a bottom 5 offense. Whit Merrifield, I'm not saying that he's on the same level of a Profar, but I just use Whit Merrifield as an example. Not the typical type of Braves hitter that you've seen in recent years, but when he came, he took a walk. He put the ball in play consistently. At the bottom of the order, he helped the lineup turn over more. He was able to help in multiple ways outside of hitting home runs, kept this offense consistent. And that is what stands out about Jurickson Profar. A 140 or better WRC plus in 2 of the last 3 seasons with runners in scoring position. A 110 WRC plus batting 1st, 2nd, and 5th last year. He can bat anywhere in the lineup. He could take a walk. He could put the ball in play. He's going to be able to be someone that can get the hit to start a rally, or get the big hit to extend an inning, or get the big hit when we're not hitting home runs in order to win games. We talked about the fact that the versatility of this lineup needed to improve. If we were not hitting home runs, we needed to be able to add a few more pieces that could allow for this lineup to still be able to score runs to win big games. And this is the type of hitter that allows for you to do that you can use up and down the lineup in a lot of different ways.
Yeah, and the lineup versatility is no small thing. And we're pretty certain at this point that the Braves are not going to have Ronald Acuna Jr. for some portion of maybe the first month. And we know that once Ronald is healthy, he will, of course, be that leadoff hitter. But if you're telling me that Profar is going to be the Braves' leadoff hitter to start the year, I mean, he had a 380 on-base percentage last year. That's awesome. Like, full stop, especially in a year where offense was down across the league. You mentioned him getting out of San Diego, which is a large ballpark, and late at night it gets cold, especially in the summers. He should only benefit from better park environment in Atlanta. And there's real versatility. And if you're telling me that Profar is going to bat second once Acuna comes back, you're going to have a guy who's really good at on base ahead of Austin Riley, Matt Olson, Marcelo Zuna, Michael Harris. I mean, that's awesome, man. I mean, you want to talk about if everyone is healthy, and it feels like I'm knocking on every piece of wood after what happened last year. But if the Braves can get a healthy Acuna and then those 5 hitters after him, I mean, I would take that 1 through 6 against basically anybody in the game. And it just kind of, I mean, it's amazing how one signing just makes everything else smell better and look better. There's still things to do, and we'll talk about that later in the show. But man, Profar, as long as last year is not a total fluke, and that's not a guarantee, right? Like, this is not a player who's been doing it for a decade and you can just flat out bank on him being a really good hitter again. But even if he's like a fraction of the player he was last year when he was so good, he does a lot of things this Braves team could really use.
Yeah, and I will caution people. Like, he put up a 140 WRC plus last year. I would not expect, like, that feels like his career year, quite honestly. I would not expect that. I would definitely be more in like the 120, 115, 120, 125 range. But adding that to an already talented lineup is massive. And if you look at his expected numbers last year, like, he had an OBA of like 365, but his expected OBA was like 364. So like, there was nothing fluky. His batting average on balls in play was like right at 300. Like, it was not a fluke. It wasn't just some random, we've seen enough of those to know the telltale signs of a fluky Chris Johnson one-off season that, is nowhere close to being repeatable. This is not that. And I know that's what people are going to say who don't like the move, that he's only got 1 year of production, but there's enough evidence behind the numbers to give confidence. So yeah, I am curious to see what happens with Ozzy and Profar once Acuna comes back, because Ozzy has been locked into that 2-hole, when Acuna plays, Ozzy's been locked into that 2-hole. And I think Profar is a better hitter than Ozzy. I really do at this point. And I'm very curious to see what they do if Profar becomes that 2-hitter. I think we all agree Profar is going to probably lead off when Acuna is out. But when he comes back, what is the lineup going to look like? The lineup never matters as much as people think it does, but it is interesting to me. I'm very curious. Brian Snitker is a very loyal guy. Ozzy's been his 2-hole hitter for 3 years, 4 years now. I'm curious to see what happens if they put Profar in the middle. They bump Ozzy to the middle. I think Profar is better at the top of the lineup because the on base. I think Ozzy's better in the middle of the lineup because of the slug. Everybody thinks Ozzy's a top of the order guy because of his size, but his profile has never been a top of the order guy. He just doesn't get on base enough. I think Profar is better up there, but we'll see what they do. But Scott's 100% right. Just adding one guy, it's amazing how different you look at the whole roster, because he just connects everything. He adds on base, he adds left-handed, switch hitter, balance the lineup, an on base guy, and a leadoff guy when Ronald's out, which is, they haven't had that in ever. It's a big deal, and it is amazing what one guy adds to the whole roster.
And I think it's also interesting to note, that the Braves traded. We did a 3-man podcast, back at the end of July. The Braves traded for Jorge Soler. And when they traded for him, he had 2 years and about 27 million left on his contract for 2025 and 2026. Well, we know that the Braves immediately traded him after the offseason. Well, lo and behold, the Braves sit here and sign a guy who is a bat first guy, who they probably think can play a bit better defense. But I don't think it's any small detail that it's 3 years and 42 million, with 15 million being there for 2026 and 2027. What that tells me is not only do the Braves feel confident that with Profar, they're going to be able to work their magic once again, like they have with the Soler and others in the past, when they've been able to bring guys in and help them get to being consistent with career best numbers, but they also like the overall profile of Profar a bit better for the lineup than they did, for instance, a guy like Soler. The fact that he doesn't strike out as much, the fact that he gets on base maybe a little bit more, the fact that situational hitting is there. So I really do feel like that when we talk about those expected numbers, when we talk about, what they feel he could add value to when it comes to the lineup, the Braves really do feel that they can have Profar be consistent. Again, maybe not at that 140 WRC plus, but it can be a consistent 115, 120 month in and month out that would really add that level of consistency we were all harping for last year for this Braves lineup.
And there's a lot of layers to this signing, but I mean, just a small one I wanted to quickly hit on here is that Profar is from Curacao. The Braves have a rich history in that country. Andrew Jones, Ozzie Albies. I know Ozzie was the top comment on the Braves' Instagram post tonight announcing the deal. I'm sure those guys are buddies. They're about the same age or close to it, so I'm sure they grew up together. Jair Jurgens, Andrelton Simmons, even Kenley Jansen, who was here for a minute. So there's a lot of history with the Braves in Curacao, and I'm sure for an organization that has so much history there, it's maybe there's not a tangible on-field aspect of that, but nonetheless, really cool to kind of reunite with these guys, and I'm sure they're pumped.
Yeah. You would think Curacao might be a suburb of Atlanta, the way they add players. But yeah, just real quick on the money. Shawn mentioned 3 years, $42 million. So I know people are going to ask. So obviously 3 years, $42 million. That means the average annual value is $14 million a year. That's not his cash. His cash, like Shawn just said, is 12 this year, 15 and 15 for the next 2 years. But the average annual value is $14 million. So for luxury tax purposes, that's going to put the Braves right around, they were at 217 before this signing, right around 217. Again, we don't know the exact numbers because we don't know what the benefits are. But after this signing, add 14 to 217, obviously you get 231. So the Braves are around 231 million in terms of luxury tax. The first threshold is 241. So the Braves have about 10 million to spend. Depending on what they do AAV wise, but it's about 10 million to spend before the threshold on luxury tax. And then on cash payroll, the Braves were sitting at about 195 or 200, depending on how many pre-arb guys they had on their roster. So you add 12 to that, the Braves are going to be at about, 212, 208, 212, something like that in cash payroll. So cash payroll sits about 208, 212, 210, something like that. Luxury tax payroll is going to sit right around 231 with about 10 million to go before you get to the threshold.
Along with the money, the other thing that stands out to me about Jurickson Profar is, for lack of a better way of putting it, it's a bit of insurance, right? We talked about the fact that when it came to the Braves really looking to add someone to this lineup, a position player to, the clubhouse. Number one, I want to say, I think that it's been said before, Jurickson Profar has a bit of personality to him. We talk about all the different, talents that have left the Braves organization, that Curacao connection, but also it seems like that he is someone that's liked. He's the type of guy who seems to have a personality who you want him on your team, but don't necessarily want to face him if he's not on your team. That type of personality, that's going to be a good personality to bring into the clubhouse. But it's also a bit of insurance. You've also obviously got the fact that you've got another consistent outfielder until Ronald gets back, and then Profar will play left field. Ozzie Albies has had a bit of injury history over the past 3 or so years. Profar could probably project to play a little bit of second base if Ozzie Albies were to go down. I know the defense probably is not that great. But the other thing is that the 3 years, $15 million, there is no small coincidence that that's right in line with what Marcell Ozuna is making this year. If Ozuna has another outstanding year, perhaps prices himself out of Atlanta, then you've got Profar who could slot right in and be another DH type who could be in there as well. So I think that's something that stands out. Me and Stephen have talked multiple times about the lack of depth that's within the Braves. So having a guy that can profile in many different areas, depending on what the need is, I think that that's no small part of the value that Profar brings. Again, going back to the word versatility.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And you look at this lineup now, at least for, the first month or however long, relying on Jared Kelenic and probably Brian De La Cruz in right field. Okay. It's not great, but you can survive with that for a month, I think. I don't know if you guys feel different, but by adding Profar, you just add a lot of insurance to this team. It gives you an everyday corner outfielder. If Michael Harris were to get hurt again, and let's hope he doesn't, that means that Jared Kelenic is then going to have to play center field more than likely. Then, of course, you just kind of add another option, because I think we all felt on the podcast, the Braves almost had to add a really good outfielder this winter, because, man, I mean, if Ronald's not healthy or if Harris gets hurt again, it was going to be so thin and so ugly out there in a hurry. And now you add this player who's coming off a career year. As we said off the top, even if Profar comes down a little bit, that's still more than playable, more valuable, and than some of the options the Braves had otherwise. And It just feels like, again, you add this one player to your lineup, whether he's at the top, whether he's in the middle. Maybe the Braves want Ozzie to face lefties and bat him second, and then against righties, you have Profar bat second. It really is just kind of a puzzle, and he's a piece that fits a lot of places compared to a Jorge Soler, as you just mentioned, Shawn, or an Anthony Santander, who just got like double the money that Profar got. And you compare those two players, at least for what the Braves need, I would take Profar all day long, especially at what it costs to sign those two players.
So let me ask you guys a question, because I was thinking about this. So obviously Jared Kelenic last year lost his job to Ramon Laureano. We all know by the end of the year, Kelenic wasn't playing at all. It was Laureano in left, Michael Harris in center, and Jorge Soler in right. So he lost his job last year. He pretty much just lost his job again. I mean, he's going to play until Acuna gets back, but once Acuna comes back, the Braves have 3 outfielders locked up for at least 3 years now. I mean, all 3 of these guys now have, I mean, it's the first time in a while the Braves have a left fielder that has real money, real years of control in front of them. So my question is, do we think Kelenic is going to stick? I think there's a world where they trade Kelenic. I really do. And I know he's the backup center fielder right now, but you can always put Eli White on the roster and have a backup center fielder. You know, with Harris being left-handed, with Profar being a switch hitter, you don't necessarily have to have another left-handed guy like Kelenic, like you did before when you had a lot of right-handed outfielders. I'm just curious. And I'm also curious how Kelenic is going to respond to basically having his job taken away.
Yep.
Do you guys think Kelenic sticks around, or do you think Alex might look to move him in a trade maybe this winter? Or is he too valuable as maybe a backup center fielder or even a right fielder while Acuna's out?
Yeah, my immediate feeling is this: is that I feel like that the value of Kelenic still certainly remains, because he can fit as a fourth outfielder. Kelenic offers a lot of value, in my opinion. He can play center field. Obviously, he is that left field bat. He can play pretty decent defense. I mean, I think there's no question he's our second best defender in the outfield. If Michael Harris were to go out for a month or so, if you don't have Kelenic, well, you really, I know Eli White is there, but do you want him starting for a month? And I also think that there is, still, some potential upside, especially with the new hitting coach, maybe a new voice in the clubhouse could get him going. And finally, I know that he potentially could be a trade piece, but how much trade value is there now when outside of the first 2 months of 2023, you've really got multiple years of, is he even a replacement level type player? So to me, I think that the value that he adds defensively, being a left-handed bat, being able himself to stay healthy and play every day, I think in the right deal he could be traded. But I think as a fourth outfielder, Jared Kelenic offers plenty of value and is also a good potential option off the bench as a pinch hitter in scenarios as well.
Yeah, I mean, I guess my answer, Stephen, would depend on what do teams think of Jared Kelenic. If he's going to be the third piece in a deal, I think it probably behooves the Braves to hang on to him and just throw in a minor leaguer, because the likelihood of getting 162 out of Harris and Profar and Ronald for however many games, maybe we're all snake bitten after last year, but I think last year was a real lesson in having depth. And I think Kelenic has shown me at least just enough where I just don't want to give up just yet. You're right, though, that if everyone's healthy, he's never going to play. And
I just wonder like how he feels. Like he had some clubhouse problems in Seattle when he wasn't playing. I just wonder now that he's not going to play a lot, like if that's something they're concerned about. I know Alex is going to talk to the media. Bowman sent out a tweet on X earlier that was kind of like the first question he was going to ask is basically like, what does this mean for Jared Kelenic? And I'm sure Alex is going to give a very GM answer and essentially not answer the question. But I am wondering now that he knows his playing time has just been cut by a ton, where's his head at? Is he going to be okay with this role? I don't know. It might not be anything, but it's one of the first things I thought of.
Yeah, it's valid. And, at the risk of trying to pretend like I know what's going through Jared Kelenic head tonight, I mean, we don't know, but I would hope that if he's a member of the team on a winning organization, a team that obviously gave him a real chance to be an every single day starter just a year ago, I would hope that he's mature and professional enough to not pout in the corner if he's not playing. And I would think he'd also realize he's behind two all-stars in Harris and Acuna, and then a player who was one of the best outfielders in the game just a year ago. We've talked about this offseason. Kelenic does things that are valuable. He showed in June just how good he can be when everything clicks. Hit for power. He was walking. He was driving the baseball. And then it kind of went away. And we just don't know. I think I'm inclined, unless a team is over the moon for Kelenic in a trade, like say the Padres are over the moon for Jared Kelenic for some reason, and they're trying to trade one of their starting pitchers. See you, Jared. I'll take you to the airport if
exactly.
need be.
Yeah.
But if there's no real market, I don't think I'm necessarily like actively looking to get rid of Kelenic unless he, explicitly says to Brian Snitker or Anthopoulos, play me or I'm going to be a total pain in the ass. I would hope that this will work out and he'll be able to be a fourth outfielder and get a chance to play pretty much every day until Ronald is ready to go.
And I think the other thing that stands out about this move is that, when we talk about, what are the Braves going to do? What are the Braves going to do? What are the Braves going to do? We got the Jeff Hoffman, almost steal that was out there. I think that there was rumblings that before Garrett Crochet was traded to the Boston Red Sox, the Braves, I think, were a finalist, or there was indications that they were in the talks for that. So it seems that they've consistently done their work on arms. Well, now that we've kind of done the heavy lifting when it comes to our first big move of the offseason, being a bat and a versatile one who could, kind of fill multiple needs as one person, it really seems like the spotlight shifts in terms of what is next to the arms. And I think that's important to discuss because you still have multiple needs out there when it comes to an arm. You've got an open relief spot, a pretty valuable one as well that you got to fill. And we could obviously use another starting pitcher as well. So now that the Braves have made their move to add a long-term piece when it comes to a position player, I feel like it may be the opportunity for Alex Anthopoulos to get a bit creative and see what he could do to add an arm or two to really fill out the rest of this offseason.
Yeah, that's next for me, boys. Get a starting pitcher. I think if we can paint a rosy picture that if Strider is healthy and if Sale and Schwellenbach and Lopez all stay healthy, and if Grant Holmes can show he can start, or maybe Ian Anderson is healthy, or maybe Smith Shawver, maybe Waldrip, maybe Bryce Elder, if you can tell yourself a story where it all works out in the rotation. But that's a risk, man. Me personally, and if we believe there's money to be spent, and it sounds like there is, based on what they just gave Profar today and what Stephen has talked about with both the luxury tax and the cash payroll, starting pitcher is like the big project for me moving forward for this team.
Yeah, we should say Bowman reported today, I think in his newsletter, that he had heard from sources the Braves had about $33 million to spend for the offseason. Obviously, they just spent $12 million of that on Profar. So that would tell you they have about $20 million to spend. They can spend $20 million, and that would put them right around where their cash was last year, at the end of last year when they added Soler and Luke Jackson. They took on money to get both of those guys. And from what I've been able to figure, they ended last year right around $235 million cash payroll. And right now they're right around like 210. So they can add, that like his number 33, that makes sense to me. And obviously they just spent 12 of it. So that tells you they should have about 20 million left. And they can do that in the luxury tax as well. We talked about it last night. I really don't think they care about the tax. I think they're fine going over it. And so I agree. I think starting pitcher, I do think they probably want another reliever at some point. They do have a lot of interesting guys on the 40-man that can potentially be useful relievers. And that's how relievers come up a lot of times is no names and then, have amazing years. And I understand that logic. Like, when you're trying to figure out which relievers are going to be good any given year, it's kind of like catching lightning in a bottle. It's very difficult. Sometimes you're just better off throwing a bunch of names at it, seeing what happens. So that might be what they do. But I agree with Scott. I think starting pitching, I think you need one more guy. There's still a couple names on the free agent market that I would be interested in at least as some depth pieces. Andrew Haney probably being the biggest one at this point. I know Pavetta. I think Pavetta is still out there as well. I know he's got a qualifying offer attached to him, which complicates that situation. But I said this earlier. Sometimes you actually get some value out of that because it suppresses a guy's market so much. So, but yeah, I agree. I think starting pitching is definitely where they go next.
And the final point that I'll make that also stands out about this, guys, is that, Alex Anthopoulos, I don't necessarily know if it's does it again is the way to put it, but this is very much an Alex Anthopoulos type move. He is not a reactive decision maker. All these different contenders are making all these different moves, all these different, as you mentioned, Scott, it's getting late quickly when it comes to the offseason with all these different free agents and trade candidates going to the wayside. Me and Stephen talked about it last night, though. So many people had speculated that there were money restrictions and things like that. I had said what I think that it just is that Alex is someone who has consistently shown when he goes after a player, he's got the years, he's got the number in place. If it goes above that, he's not going to outbid himself or go above that. He was waiting for the type of players that would fall into the wheelhouse of where he was comfortable. And lo and behold, we get a player who meets many of the needs that we needed offensively. So I think that this just goes to show once again, Alex Anthopoulos, when it comes to making the moves, he may not necessarily make it at the time that we're waiting for it to be made. He may not necessarily make it when others are making it, but he'll make the right move when it needs to be made. And he did it once again.
Yeah, absolutely. And, 3 years, 42 million. That seems to me like a very fair deal. I think Brad and I talked on the show maybe a month ago when we kind of did a reset of the free agent market, and we talked about Profar for 5 or 10 minutes. And the fact was, if this was a guy who had been doing it at a high level for multiple seasons, probably would have gotten 5 years and $100 million. Similarly, if he was a great defender, you could probably add at least another year and another $10 or $15 million on the contract. So it's not as if Profar is a guarantee. There are questions for sure. Interestingly enough, one of the big questions that we had on the podcast a month ago was, what do front offices think of Jurickson Profar, and was last year real? And obviously the Braves think it is. And friend of the show, Grant McCauley, is on the media call with Anthopoulos right now. And Anthopoulos said that they believe that the swing changes that Profar made in his career best 2024 were legitimate. And they believe in the changes that Profar made and feel like that's going to be sustainable and more of who he is moving forward. Obviously, it's just one opinion. I would love to have a survey of like all 30 front offices to get an idea of what they feel like is real and what might be smoke with Profar. But again, I tweeted it out maybe an hour or two ago as of recording this. You look at a video from Profar in 2023 and a Profar video in 2024, and his swing did change significantly. He was much more vertical. He had a more pronounced leg kick. And just the swing as a whole, especially on the left side, just looked much more natural, more fluid, more violent. I would imagine, I didn't look it up, but I'd bet money that his swing rate and bat speed were significantly increased as well, based on the exit velocity. So yeah, it is a bit of a gamble from the Braves, but for 3 years and $42 million, sure, there's always risk with a multi-year contract for a guy in his 30s, but this is very much an Alex coded move. And now for the next 3 years, we get to find out if last season was a sign of things to come, or if it was a fluke, then then obviously it's a problem.
Yeah, so I was actually wondering, and as we speak, Alex is talking to the media, so I'm kind of trying to catch up. But I was actually wondering in my head, and Brad just put it in our chat. Thank you, Brad Rowland. Because last year Profar had struggles with his range in the outfield defensively. I think everybody who's looked it up kind of sees that. Was not a great range guy in the outfield. Had a decent arm. And so I was actually sitting here thinking, I wonder if they put him in right field since it's smaller and truest, and let Kelenic play left field since he's got more range. But we just see that Alex just answered that question, that Profar is going to play left, and that Kelenic and De La Cruz are going to split right field until Acuna comes back. So we have that answer. Matching skill set to the size of the outfield. I was thinking if maybe they would consider putting Profar in right until Acuna came back, but that's not going to be the case. He's going to be in left. I'm sure they just want him to get comfortable in left and not switch him around a bunch. So that, the defense is going to be a question. He was not a good defender last year. There's no getting around that. He's not a natural outfielder. He came up when Scott was talking about he was the number one prospect in baseball. He was actually a shortstop back then, which is typically, the number one prospect in baseball is typically a shortstop. So he's not a natural outfielder, does have a decent arm. Range is not his strength. There's probably going to be some adventures at times in the outfield. We're just got to live with it. Braves fans are used to that with Jorge Soler and Eddie Rosario and the likes that have roamed the Braves outfield the last few years. But it is notable that he will be in left and Kelenic and De La Cruz will be in right until Acuna comes back.
And of course, just as we're talking about, potentially what could be the next move, as AA is speaking, it does seem as if is that he, did allude to the fact that the Braves at this moment are not close to anything else. They've explored starter and reliever opportunities, and will stay engaged. Now, of course, when AA says something like that, that means that we'll likely be doing another emergency podcast within 24 hours. And if that's the case, that is perfectly fine. Scott, Stephen, it's been a ton of fun. Always love doing these with both of y'all. Again, I will back this up anytime that I have the chance to. Do the best when it comes to covering the Braves, and just always fun getting your perspective. Anything else as we wrap up this emergency podcast edition of Jurickson Profar being the newest Atlanta Brave?
Yeah, boys, I'm a little sad as we wrap up this episode because I think this pretty much guarantees that we are not going to do our infamous scream into the void at the end of the offseason episode. I think like daily, I was getting tweets from people saying, can we do it now? Can you do the episode now? I need the therapy. I need to hear you guys let it out. There was a reason that we kept saying, as painful as it was, you have to give them until mid-February before we crucify them for not doing anything. A lot of players out there, and there still are a lot of players out there. I know Alex said they're not close, but the guy is the king of GM speak, and who knows when the next move will come. But at least for now, it seems like we won't do that episode screaming into the void. And I'm pumped for the move. I really like Profar. As the offseason has progressed, it just felt like it was more and more possible that there would be a reunion. And now we'll see. It is a bit of a calculated gamble by the Braves that what Profar did last year as an all-star is something that he can come close to doing the next couple of seasons. But I'm really excited. If you had to ask me today, I'd say I'm pumped for the move. It's a contract I would do every single day of the week. And finally, we have an exciting move and an addition to talk about this offseason rather than saying goodbye to a whole bunch of folks.
Yeah, there's a reason, like Scott just said. I don't know how many times I said it on a podcast this winter, but wait till the end of the offseason to judge the offseason. Like, people were just prematurely judging everything. I didn't think it was fair. At the very least, you have to give the team, the full offseason to make their moves. You don't get any bonus points for having moves done in November versus January. It's the same. So big shout out to Alex for doing this the day after we did a show where, we talked about, I said it multiple times. I thought that I still believe they were going to make moves. I thought they had money to spend. Bowman had that report today. They had money to spend. So shout out to Alex for, the next day making, one of the biggest move. You look at free agency, Alex doesn't do a lot in free agency. Typically he does a lot in terms of extending his own players, but like 45 or 42 million is, one of his bigger free agent contracts actually. So that's a significant move. And I don't think they're done by, the same way I didn't think they were going to do absolutely nothing. I don't think they're done. I think they're going to add a starter. They still have room in payroll, both cash and luxury tax. I think that's 100% going to be the next move. I wouldn't be surprised at a reliever either, but I think they're going to get another starter at some point. And my guess is we're going to be doing another one of these sometime before, we get to opening day.
Just to add context, this is, I think, the first multiple year deal for an offensive player, for a position player, that Alex Anthopoulos has done, at least notable.
Since
Josh,
Ozuna.
He gave Ozuna 4 years.
Yeah.
So he gave him the 1 year deal first, and he extended him, right? Yeah.
No,
so
he didn't. That was a free agent. Ozuna got to free agency after the 1 year deal, and then he gave him a 4 year deal.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So just in terms of pure, but same difference. Yeah. But to your point, we haven't had much reason to add a hitter, to the level of a Profar. But kudos to Alex for finding the right deal and continuing. Sometimes the best move is continuing to strengthen a strength, especially when you see some faults in what you had perceived to be a clear strength. Now they've got that versatility, and we should be good to go. But
Yeah,
hopefully,
I would say, I'm sorry to cut. I think Braves fans are really going to like Profar.
Yeah.
I had some Padres fans tweet me today saying, take care of him. We loved him. Similarly, Dodgers fans absolutely hate this guy. He was the one who kind of instigated a whole ordeal in the playoffs where fans were throwing things at Profar in left field. He robbed a home run at the fence and trolled the fans in the first row, and that started World War III in LA. So, yeah, I think this is a guy who's going to quickly kind of, I don't know, Braves fans are going to quickly come to really like this guy because he does play with a swagger and an attitude that I think you need over 162 games and just the monotony of day in and day out of baseball for 6 months. You need guys who are going to bring a spark and bring some energy. And that seems like, at least from afar, what Profar is going to bring.
Agreed. Well, guys, it's been a pleasure. I look forward to hopefully doing this maybe 3 or 4 more times before spring trading. I kid, maybe at least one more time. But for Stephen Tolbert at B_outliers, Scott Coleman at Scott Coleman 55. If you're not already following them, what are you doing? Follow these guys. Their opinions are some of the best things to follow when it comes to Braves baseball. My name is Shawn Coleman at StatsSAC on X/Twitter as well, at Hammer Territory across all forms of social media, as well as part of the Foul Territory family of podcasts. And a thank you to the lone man who is not here tonight, but is in the background, Brad Rowland. This is all for you, man. Wish you were here, but glad you're here in spirit. We know that you enjoy the signing just as much as we do. So
we're gonna do a 4-man show at some point. I don't know when. I don't know what the celebration will be, but at some point we will do a 4-man show. People have asked me multiple times because we've done 3-man shows. We've never done a 4-man show. It will happen at some point.
Yeah, World Series seems like a good reason to do it, but maybe something on a bit smaller scale. But until next time, go Braves. We'll talk to you again soon. And one final note, a move has finally been made. Go Braves. We'll talk to you again soon here on the Hammer Territory podcast.